Welcome to Binge Theory, the coolest corner on the internet. My name is Julian, and with me today we have two film aficionados. We have Logan.
Hey.
And we have Eric.
Hello.
Hey, and we have just recently digested one of the largest films possible, Lawrence of Arabia, starring Peter O'Toole, Alec Guinness, Anthony Quinn, Jack Hawkins, an amazing cast, a very, very long film, and we wanted to talk to it. But before we start this, we were just touching base on another film that I had seen and Logan had seen. We had talked about it before, but I just, wanted to, I guess give you an appetizer. I was a big fan of Martin Scorsese's work back in the late 70s and early 80s. I wasn't seeing them real time in theaters, but I've, digested his overall playlist. And obviously the film that was put together for Joker pulled strongly from those. And Eric, did you see Joker?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, okay, great. And because this is fantastic. Logan and I had already talked about it, but I really want to get your thoughts because Eric, you and I haven't discussed it, but I wanted to get your take on just what your impressions were and how you thought it actually, communicated what the whole point of it was. And because we all, I think we all have different interpretations or different things we appreciated or didn't like. And I'm sorry, Logan didn't see it, but I think we need to talk about one of the reasons why he didn't see it. And, I think it always needs to be communicated in how people are perceiving these types of films. So, but first, Eric, please tell me what you thought right off the bat of the film, like what you liked, what you didn't, your overall.
Okay. Impression. So yeah, my initial impression of Joker was a bit of disgust, I would say. I was hurt by it. And when I say that, I was hurt by it because it was at the outset, it was just this piece of violence, that was coming towards me with no real beginning and no real end, right? But I really wanted to understand why I felt that way, and what it became for me was a dive into people with mental problems and mental, real psychosis. I had the background of Joker reading the comics, knowing that he is just a bundle of loose ends with no history, no origin story, no finality. He is chaos, right? And so I knew that going into the movie. And I was expecting not to get a clear origin story. I was expecting that. So for me, what it was really shining a light on people that had a very tough upbringing and people that have serious mental problems. And for me, it was after I got past the disgust of the movie, I had an appreciation for what they were trying to show. And they were trying to show that these people have a really hard time, and society is not there to help them. Right? From the therapist that kept pushing him off, and so in a nutshell, that was my movement, I would say, through the Joker.
And now that's some excellent observational points. I agree. I think this intentionally was very visceral and very dark and very unsettling. The setting obviously was 80s New York, which in and of itself looks like something out of a nightmare. And the life that Joaquin Phoenix's character was living was, just of degradation and, humility, but being put upon at every turn. His boss belittled him. The kids in the neighborhood beat him up. Everything he was basically the underdog, which brings up a very interesting point, because this film, in a sense, romanticizes a lot of the violence, not in a way that makes it like Rambo violence, where it's hyper violent and all that. The violent incidents have a lot of consequence, and it's abrupt, and it's unsettling. But I have a feeling that it is kind of diluted because you feel empathy for the character Joker as he's growing up, because he has this circumstance which he's out of control with.
And that was part of the problem that I had with it, right? Because I felt for the guy, but at the same time, he's, bashing people's heads open. And I mean, I'm like, what is the world coming to? Why am I feeling this way? But that's what movies is about, right? I mean, you want to walk out of the theater feeling something, like that's,
well,
that's important.
You can't help but feel something when you leave this one.
Yeah.
It hits you over the head with it. And again, the thing that I found really interesting is, obviously Todd Phillips made this, and Todd Phillips, cut his teeth in comedy, but I could see him kind of shifting towards a darker edge with, oddly enough, Hangover 3, because it was just very kind of like ominous with Logan, you're really into scores. There was a lot of like heavy cello and stuff in,
Sure.
now don't get me wrong, Hangover 3 was horrible, but I saw glimpses of his kind of shifting towards a more dramatic tone, as opposed to just guys, blacking out on roofies and going around getting mauled by Mike Tyson's tiger. There was a little more nuance to it. And when he went full on just dark, it was kind of unsettling, because here's the problem. I would have appreciated if he was a person, and this may sound, dismissive, but I could have appreciated it more if he had a mental illness that forced him to do these things and he was out of control, or he was a regular person who was molded by his environment and made him do these things. But because this is a combination, because he was mentally ill beforehand and he was in a bad situation, so you do feel that conflict. I mean, is it his fault? Would he have done this or been this way regardless of his background and upbringing? So because they kind of just blur the lines, you do feel like, well, I don't know how to feel. I mean, was this guy a victim, or was he lying in wait for this madness to just come out either way? And that's one of the things I found. It didn't have a clear narrative in that respect.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, but Logan, you did not see it, but given what we're saying and what your first impressions were just by the trailer, and also you got to remember, at the time there was a lot of social commentary and just unfounded projections of what this was about, because people hadn't seen it yet, but everybody had opinions. So,
Yeah.
but Logan has a unique perspective as to how he looked at it. And please,
I mean, I guess unique to some extent. I mean, for me, right off the bat, I think the easiest one is just kind of the same reason why I never got into Game of Thrones, is that I don't really like watching things about irredeemable villains. Like, it's not fun for me to watch who's the worst or who can be the worst, or, just that kind of glorification of the villain role. It never really rang with me. While there was certainly, from the look of the trailer, which was, a beautifully well done trailer, you could tell there were certainly, cinematic elements that would be, you could appreciate watching it. But the story was never one that I wanted to really devote my time to.
and that's very, and truly, I mean, Eric, tell me if you're agreeing with me on this, is that the craft was evident. I mean, just, the cinematography and the score and some of the impromptu dancing was iconic.
Oh yeah.
Cinematically. I mean, those are scenes that are going to be played in classes. But I would say that it was a little disjointed because it was a DC property and it was about mental illness, but it was also about a deteriorating society. I think if they would have taken the DC element out of it, it probably could have been something a little more, cohesive. But I think it just had a lot on its plate, and it tried to touch on a lot of things. And Logan, you're lucky you didn't see this, but Eric can know what I'm saying. Is that it's just like they kept peeling back the onion, and there was something horrible around each turn from the very beginning. It's and Logan, you're not going to see it, so I can go ahead and spoil it. But he finds a letter that his mother says that what Thomas Wayne is his real father, and that's one of the turns. And then he finds out that maybe he's not, and then he finds out maybe he is, and then he finds out that he was as a child beaten and suffered brain damage, and that his mother wasn't mentally ill, and it was just so much. It was like a human centipede of misery. It was just bad thing after bad thing after bad thing. But Joaquin Phoenix's performance was just, it was, and again, Eric hit on an excellent point about the mental illness. I think he really tried to, portray mental illness in a realistic fashion where, you're relying on society and the institutions to take care of you. And when they don't, they just don't. And you can see some people tried, but not really wholeheartedly, and they just didn't have an infrastructure in place to really do anything. So it was definitely a commentary on, society and how they treat the mentally ill, and how it was always. And the reason why, obviously, this time of this currently, there's a lot of unrest and protest and things. We're not going to talk about the politics of that because that's not for this. But when you see, if you were to look back at it now, there is a moment in which they took to the streets, and there was, unrest and all that stuff. And it just seems like society, given the right circumstance and the right motives, can just, to be similar to what Heath Ledger said in The Dark Knight, these civilized people will eat each other. And it was so bizarre that all it took was him having a moment, a catalyst on a subway train where he shot the three bankers. That seemed to kind of be the tipping point. Eerily similar to what's happening now, completely different circumstances, but that was the catalyst that basically had a whole bunch of people that in at that time in Gotham City, I think there was a garbage strike, so garbage was piling up all over the place. It was hot, people were miserable, and it was just that one thing that was almost gave them license to just run the streets. But Eric, what are your thoughts on that? Am I missing the point, or did you see that as well?
No, that was definitely either the screenwriter's vision of why the unrest was happening. It's called Eat the Rich is what is what it's about, right? And
Yes.
That was a critical part of the movie, and it makes you wonder, as somebody living in the middle class, is that around the corner? It makes you wonder, so.
It does, and my apologies, I don't want to make things too heavy because, but we were just talking about that before we started filming, and I just wanted to, finish that conversation because it's such a good conversation. I didn't want to have it off air, but if we can transition to Lawrence of Arabia, and if I could just, give my 30-second gist of it. What I saw, and again, because this is fresh in my mind, I literally finished watching it before we started recording. I saw Lawrence, and again, I forget his last name. It was T.E. Lawrence. So I don't think we ever learned his name. It's probably like Thomas Lawrence, but he was somewhat a ne'er-do-well soldier. I think he started off as a lieutenant, and he was, they said he had a lot of skills, but he was just unruly, and they sent him out basically to track down and find out the situation in Arabia. I believe he was, sent to keep an eye on Prince Faisal, which was played by Alec Guinness, Obi-Wan, and
Yeah.
and I do want to. And long story short, it's about him immersing himself into their causes and fighting with them on a certain behalf, and where that story goes. So that's the gist of it. I don't want to just break the whole thing down, but that being said, I do have one point, and then I'll let you guys just run with it. This was made in 1962. Let me check quick. 1962, and they do employ the use of brown face, quite a bit. And
Yeah.
and again, I will say this is that I did feel that, I mean, obviously this is a big Hollywood budget film, and absolutely, Middle Eastern people were still to this day are grossly underrepresented in Hollywood back then, if not now. And so they did, I believe, they put Alec Guinness in brownface, playing Prince Faisal, and also Anthony Quinn. They put him, and they put a prosthetic nose on him. So that there was that, and several of the other characters were, let's just say, ambiguous with their ethnicity, but you could tell they weren't local talent. They were kind of brought over from Hollywood, which I will just say, I think, given this circumstance and given the fact that it was not a completely derogatory depiction and dismissive, it was more just acting this character out with the highest quality characters that they recognized and that the public would recognize. Obviously, you also had Omar Sharif in it, which was a fantastic role, and I'm so glad that he was in it represented. But all the characters are strong. It's just, given this circumstance, I thought that the brown face was not warranted, but I will give it a pass. I'm officially giving it a pass. You can quote me on that. And what were your guys' thoughts on just the overall story, the cinematography, yada, yada, yada?
Logan, go ahead.
Sure. The overall story. So when I caught this, I recognized the name of it, and I knew it was, one of those movies that I just need to eventually sit down and see in my life at some point. But I knew nothing other than that. And 3 hours later, I did not expect to actually be that depressed at the end of it. I was really, really, I guess, taken in by the directing and the imagery and the story, and to end on kind of the note that it ended on, or just the overall feeling. Like I didn't even actually realize at the time that it was based on a real person. So that in itself was a surprise, and kind of going back and seeing some of, actually reading the actual history, or as much as you can get the actual accurate history. But yeah, just that I got caught up in the kind of spiral and descent, and that, dejection of everything he accomplished. Did he actually fail when all was said and done? It was a roller coaster, and then it ended, and I went, well, crap, that isn't how I wanted to go to bed at 2 a.m.
Yeah, I have to say, Logan, I was in the exact same boat as you. It was always one of those movies that I knew I'm going to have to watch, but I always put it on the back burner. I knew it was a long movie.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those things where it's like, as a kid, you don't like broccoli, but later on in life, you actually do like broccoli, And so sometimes you have to be at the right space in your life to watch certain movies,
Absolutely.
And I felt like I was ready to watch this movie, and I'll admit I watched it over 3 nights. my fiance Kelly, she wanted to watch it with me, which I was really happy about. And but when you're watching a movie sometimes with other people, you have to take breaks or whatever. So this actually ended up being 3 different sessions of watching the movie, and we both really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much more than I thought I was going to enjoy it. I was an international studies major in college, so a lot of the kind of colonialism and empires, like I'm really into that kind of thing, or better or worse. And I felt like at the end of this movie that it was really such a forward-thinking, complete movie for the time that it came out. I mean, if you go back into that time where you're saying that the Arabs have as much at stake, here as the colonialists, right? And then you're not really sure about the sexuality of Lawrence, and to kind of just go with that, I really thought that the movie had a lot of progressive things about it, even despite there were brown faces, but I gave it a pass for that as well. But no, I was very impressed by the movie. I will give a movie a couple of points just for cinematography, which I got. There were fantastic battle scenes, which I was explaining to Kelly. I'm like, those are real horses.
Yes.
Those are real people riding the horses. There's maybe the backdrop is painted, but all of the action that you're seeing in front of you actually happened. And so I just love seeing that. Like as a cinema fan.
Yeah.
I appreciate the hard work that went into that. And then just the whole character, of Lawrence. He had so many different layers, and I really enjoyed the movie. So
if I can dovetail onto that, I mean, I think we're all on the same page in regards to the cinematography just being. Again, I don't want to reuse the word, but iconic in just the imagery. And what's funny is I remember first watching it, and for the first 4.5 minutes, it's all black, and you're just hearing the score, which it was amazing. But I remember because I found a file online through dubious methods, but I found a file online and it started playing, and I'm watching. It's like, oh, this is a bad file. There's nothing happening here. And then I purchased it on demand, just like $4. So I was like, but I got to see it. And by the way, I'm 100% with you. I would not have seen this unless I was talking about it with you guys, because it's on my top 100 list. But that's 3 hours. So you got to really want to see it or be in a circumstance for it. So I buckled down and I just watched it. And that being said, the first 4 minutes where it's just black, and also, let me ask you guys about this. Did you get kind of a Citizen Kane feel? Because it started with Peter O'Toole's death, and then it was like not a retrospective, but that's how the story started, where they were at his funeral, and they were talking about him and said, oh yeah, he was an amazing man, and then they cut back. So it just reminded me a little bit of that. Like that was, I don't know, a little formulaic, but I mean, it worked. And but in regards to the cinematography, I mean, the desert shots, and you're 100% right, Eric. I was amazed at all the actual stunt work and practical effects they had.
Yeah, that was incredible.
Yeah, the first of all, the derailing of the trains was like, how are they going to do that? I mean, you can't go back to one if something goes wrong. You're literally these are like full-size trains that they're just derailing, and yeah, you're right. Like looks like 1,000 or so horses in full speed, through rocky terrain. And even when they just had camels walking up like those jagged rocks, I mean, my heart's going out. I'm an animal lover, and I'm just like, somebody making sure these animals aren't breaking their legs, which I'm sure a lot of them were injured. I didn't see any ASPCA logo at the end.
No, I'm gonna think not in this one.
Yeah, they did a lot of those forced falls that you do when you're
Yeah.
shot because apparently your horse falls down. And but yeah, I agree 100%. The cinematography was fantastic. But and I'm sorry, Logan, you were also going to say something about the cinematography as well. Some things that jumped out at you, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, certainly just the depictions of not just the backgrounds and where they were, but the use of lighting and the way that they would be able to whether it was to silhouette or whether it was to kind of fade and go back and forth between scenes, to even just express the overwhelming atmosphere of the location they were in, was just glorious. And we're certainly coming along in virtual sets, but there's nothing like being on location quite yet. Mandalorian possibly excluded, but that's a different conversation.
That is true. And when they said, "Yeah, we're going to cross that," and they pan to this desert, and you're like, "I can't watch this." And
What the Ten Commandments kind of went back almost that way, sort of a thing. Like it became almost a mini biblical epic in the middle of this whole like war tale.
let's talk about that because he literally one of the deserts he was crossing, he literally said, "Why not? Moses did it." And and that was kind of when you started to see him getting this whole God complex.
Oh yeah.
And again, I will definitely compare it. And Eric, if you're a student of history, it just reeked of Alexander the Great. Just basically, saying, "I can go and everything will bend to my will," because God complex, and he's basically saying, "I will conquer everything because it's me," and he just takes these people that believe in him emphatically, and just goes about doing it. And that was pretty interesting. That was one of those things that I found unsettling. Not just his self-aggrandizing, but just the fact that people will follow somebody with charisma and
oh yeah.
yeah. Again, I'm keeping it light, but it seems like it was very unsettling how people were just marching into uncertain safety because this guy just said, "Yeah, we're going to take Damascus. Let's go." And they were like, "Okay, I guess we're taking Damascus," and then they do it. So it was interesting. I did find it. There was a lot of symbolism that I noticed, and I want your guys' thoughts on this. When he first gets his white outfit, when he becomes Lawrence of Arabia, and they burn his clothes, and he gets like a traditional outfit, and he has that, like, he pulls out a knife, the dagger, and he looks at it, and he's like admiring him in the blade, and he's just really taken by himself.
Yeah.
And he's just like laughing, looking down, laughing at just how glorious he looks. And then at the end, after he I think massacres a whole bunch of Turks that had just recently raided a village, he looks at the blade again, and it is just soiled in blood. So I definitely think there was a callback to, the reflection of oneself when you're pristine, and then at the end of the journey when you're changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that was not just reflected in the knife, but even just in his demeanor and appearance and how much more manic and broken he got as time went on. And the caliber and quality of the people that started to follow him, became a very kind of an altruistic bunch and turned into, mercenaries and rapists and whatnot kind of at the end. So there were a number of kind of parallel things along with the knife that kind of followed that whole, descent into where he ended up.
It wasn't about the cause; it was about him. And I thought that was really, and to that point where he was not recognizable. At the very end, if you remember when his whole infrastructure just collapsed, because one of the themes I also got was it's so easy to conquer, but it is very hard to rule. And so yeah, he destroyed everything, and then he's like, look, this hospital's just bodies stacked on top of bodies, and then the British Red Cross show up, and the lead guy is like, this is barbaric, this is insane, and cracks him in the mouth because he's just laughing because he's hysteric. And later on, after Peter O'Toole's character gets promoted to colonel, because apparently that's what happened when you destroy thousands of lives, they just promote you. He sees him and he's like, "Can I shake your hand?" The same guy that cracked him in the mouth said, "Can I shake your hand? I just really want to be able to say that I shook your hand." And Peter's just like, "Don't I know?" He goes, "Oh no, I would have known if I would have met you." So it was interesting how when he was just a madman covered in blood and dirt, he got smacked in the mouth, but you put a uniform on him and he's like, "Oh yeah, I need to shake your hand." I thought that was an interesting, just show of personal change, or not personal change, but transformation.
Oh yeah. For me, that was one of the major theme in the movie for me. I felt like when he went to go find out what Prince Faisal was up to, that he really just wanted to get away. He didn't want to deal with the military. He just wanted to do his own thing, and if they're going to pay him to do his own thing, then he's going to do it, but he didn't really I didn't feel like he had a motive at that point when he left to go find Prince Faisal. That was my take on him. But as you said, he was undergoing this transformation, and then you get near the end of the movie and it's a crisis, right? He realizes that he's been duped by his superiors, and that they were really from the outset just out to find out where Faisal was and where the rebels were, and what that was going to mean, so that they could advance their colonial position, And when he found that out, for sure, he was heartbroken. He wasn't regretful that he was helping the Arabs, but he was heartbroken because those are originally his people, right? And it was tough. It was really tough for him. So yeah, I thought it was a great movie.
And to your point about things being tough on him, he did go through a lot of post-traumatic stress, like incident after incident. I mean, and one thing before I say this, when he did find out that after Damascus had fallen, and the general and Faisal were just sitting there arguing over water rights. And, who would be, we want the British to, be partners in the water rights. So the whole thing looked like basically, okay, now that we've cleared out all the people, we can start with the infrastructure and make some money, cha-ching, and expand the kingdom. So it was very, kind of, we'll just let the Joker go in and destroy everything, and then we'll come after the fact and do what we do. But I remember, I think the first time he came back, and he was really dejected because he said, he lost one of his boy servants in the quicksand, and the other time he had to execute the guy. Oh, no, that was a character moment, though. I really liked that when they were crossing the desert for the first time, and one of his, one of the people in the team he was with fell asleep and fell off the camel, and they lost him. And tell me if this doesn't remind you of Empire Strikes Back, when Han Solo takes the Tauntaun to go find Luke, because they were literally saying, you go that far, you're going to die. And, I forget, Peter O'Toole had some saying, he had a lot of interesting one-liners, like, he said, if he's going to die because it's written. And I think he said, no man, any man can write his own story or something like that. And then he rides off and he gets them and he comes back right out of it was to me, I saw a lot of reference that Empire Strikes Back took in that Hoth scene with Han and Luke. than I saw from this. I saw like not a ripoff, but definitely kind of a little homage to it, and that was more heartbreaking when he had to execute him because he went through hell and high water to get him and bring him back, just to then have to execute him. So I saw that was really kind of a gripping moment, and he had a lot of sympathy because if you remember, even in the very beginning with his guide, he was sitting there and the guy looked at his gun and he said, he didn't say anything. He just saw him looking at it and he said, "It's yours. Take it." So he was, he was happy-go-lucky. He didn't have a care in the world. He was just making friends. And I think one of the things that I want to call him Obi-Wan Kenobi, but no, when Faisal, Alec Guinness said, "I think you're one of the British that just love the desert." And to an extent, that was true. It was almost like he was on vacation, and
he had some great lines.
Yeah,
Faisal,
he
says, we don't love the desert.
There's nothing here.
We want everything else besides the desert. He goes,
that was a great line. We love water and trees and grass.
Right.
But what's funny is Peter O'Toole. I remember, like the second time he was talking to Peter O'Toole, and he was explaining that he was a bastard, and they were talking about how you can write your own story, but he was like, where are you from? And he goes, "I'm from England." He goes, "What are the people like there?" And Peter O'Toole was like, "They're fat." The whole place is fat, and and he goes, "And you're not fat?" He goes, "No, I'm not fat. I'm different." And it was just interesting, his perception of British life, and I think Alec Guinness hit the nail on the head. Is he was a romantic for the desert life, and for him it was kind of an escape, and he got caught up in it, and then things started to ensue. So there were a lot of interesting things where it's about the character development, the obviously politics, and the struggle of the individuals, and the story arc. I thought it was one of the more complex stories I've ever seen, especially from that era, because it touched on a lot of different things.
I think it also did an amazing job of tiptoeing around being overtly religious. There was so much religious symbolism and imagery, and I mean, the scene you mentioned in particular, that looked to me, and for whatever reason, I guess I saw it, my own worldview bringing into it, I saw a lot more of a, British Christian Arab, Muslim kind of a conflict and stuff, and just the way things had been there. And that scene to me was almost a direct clash of religions, where Lawrence was just like, "No, you can write your own destiny. I'm going to go out and save my sheep." Because I saw that as the one from the flock, who he, being this godlike figure, I can go save this person because this person is my sheep and I am his god, kind of a thing. And then when he comes back and ends up having to kill him in order to keep the peace between the two tribes, it was that kind of asserting almost it's like the religions kept going back and forth between which one is actually dominant or not, or how are they kind of portrayed. And every time Lawrence started to try and be the god himself, if you will, one or both of them would just take him down a notch or 10. And that kind of religious struggle, maybe it's more internal to him or whatever, but just the way it was portrayed without being mentioned very overtly at all was really, really interesting to me to kind of watch and see.
I thought what I really appreciated in the movie was that the Bedouins and Faisal and his group, they all knew what was happening. They all knew what the English were about and what the empires, what they want, and what the colonialists want. None of that was a secret. None of them were going to be duped by the English. They knew from the beginning that the English had the guns, right, and that they wanted power. They were, and and I thought that was good for a movie at that time. That they were giving a culture that wasn't, one of the imperial powers. They gave them that. I'm not saying this right. That they understood. They gave them that credit. That they knew what was going on in the world. It wasn't just these people in the Middle East. They don't. We can come in and we can take it over.
Well, and what's
I
funny
didn't
is
know what to expect, but yeah.
just to validate what you're saying. There was a scene, and I don't know if it was Alec Guinness or maybe it was Omar Sharif, but he said, or maybe it was Anthony Quinn. But I remember he was talking to Peter O'Toole, and he said he made references several times to, yeah, you're just going to go back, put on your slacks, and then talk about how backwards and silly we are. But let me tell you something. It was Anthony Quinn. He said, let me tell you something. 900 years ago, we had our city streets lit up while you were still a village, and he was like, yeah, you were a great society. He's like, yeah, we were a great society. So I think because they knew, it's not like they were naive to the motivations of man. They'd probably seen it for generation after generation. Yeah. They knew it was just they were in a different circumstance, but that doesn't mean they didn't understand conquering.
Absolutely.
Yes, and I think that was really what gave them.
Expressed it a lot better than I was trying to.
No, but
Julian, that was really one of the reasons why I really appreciated the movie.
And that is likewise. I mean, that's also why I gave them a pass on the brown face, because these people were treated with the respect of being intelligent and not being manipulated. It was. And that was the one thing that I really took away from this. And it kind of reminds me of Eisenberg's Lex Luthor depiction, where, he's basically, he has that saying that now God bends to my will. It's that whole, Peter O'Toole has this sense of, and I'm not going to call it privilege, but he definitely has this sense of everything's going to happen because I want it to happen because it's me. It's a very kind of a, definitely egocentric and narcissistic way of life, but and you're right, he gets knocked down a peg at every turn because he doesn't understand the circumstance. But it's almost like a person who doesn't understand a situation comes in and destroys everything in his path to have it go the way it was going to go anyway, and he realizes he was just a pawn in a larger game. And he wasn't changing anything. He was just a tool being used to get what other people wanted, when he thought he was achieving this great thing where he was bringing his values and his morality to the table. And you watch the governor, I mean, not the governor, the general and the people, I believe, what was the other guy? Jack Hawkins, General Allenby, and Colonel Brighton, played by Jose Ferrer. They were looking at him, and even I think one time one of them bit their tongue because they were just like, you don't know what's about to happen, do you? Because he was so idealistic. And I think that's the best way to say it is they saw that idealistic. And that's why the general even said, I'm going to give you everything you need. I'm going to give you everything you need. You just go do it. Good on you. And he just destroys everybody. And then the general, when they get there to Damascus, they're like, oh, he set up office in City Hall. I mean, what are we going to do? And I love the general said this, and obviously this is still fresh in my head. He said, sometimes doing nothing's the best thing. So yeah, they were just literally waiting for this entire makeshift democracy to just implode and then come after the fact.
Yeah.
Water.
And, I mean, they really painted the English as just dummies, just gullible boneheads in the beginning of the movie, right? I mean, but the power balances they balanced out kind of, at the end of near the end of the movie, right?
But here's the thing about the military, the general and all of them. They did at first. They seemed like totally unaware of what was going on, but I think in the end, they always knew how it was going to end. It was just they wanted to find a way to make it so. And if it wasn't Peter O'Toole, it would have been somebody else. They would have just said, "Hey, who's the guy that's really, really motivated to go out and stir some stuff up, and then we come in and rob the house? And that's why at the end you saw they were in no rush to do anything. They were like, yeah, oh, you mean you moved in and you set up a democracy and it imploded within 24 hours and everybody, I didn't see that coming. It's almost like they've been doing it for such a long time that it's not even like some sort of a chess game. It's literally.
Well, that's exactly it. They just convinced everybody else they were playing checkers while they were playing chess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it almost makes you feel like the English, and this is definitely up for debate, are just so evil. I mean, just so evil that they're just like, let's just go ahead, throw the firebomb in there, and then we're going to negotiate with Prince Faisal. And if they're in charge of the power and the water, I mean, they're in charge of the place, like, so it just makes you really look at like imperialism, and was it a good thing or was it not? I mean, I don't know the
I hear you 100%, and this is my take on humanity. And like I said before, I'm kind of a cynic, and I think people are all we all have DNA in us that allows us to do good and bad things at any given point in time. I would say that the British Empire at that time was, in their mind, entitled to expand their empire. And everything they did in service of that was completely justified because the rest of the world are savages. And we can bring our justice to them, and we'll be bigger, and we're helping them. And, we'll bring them lighting and water and whatever communicable diseases we have, and that'll be good for them. Good, as long as they speak English and bow to the Queen, or I think it was the King back then. Yep, everything will be fine. And I don't think they were evil intended, but I definitely think the results were nefarious because it was like, listen, I'm going to take over your town, and we're just going to talk about how I'm going to do it. And that was kind of the thing. Is it was more like they already had the result. It wasn't like we're just going to destroy stuff and I hope something good comes out of it. It's like, no, we're going to take over these areas and plus, first of all, it was I really liked in Eric, you were talking about history. I liked the informative thing it was going for with the Suez Canal. Because I heard of it, but I didn't know a lot of the history about it and how they needed to secure it. And obviously, that's a huge trade route. And again, money.
Oh yes,
it was really interesting seeing that and putting it in context. In regards to this. So I like films that, and Logan, that makes perfect sense that this is actually a true story because it doesn't have the black and white of a Marvel film or something like that.
Right.
It's definitely just a geopolitical struggle, and they just threw in the blondest, bluest eyed guy in the world.
It's the story of an ordinary man getting just caught up in things so much larger than him, and manipulated and controlled, and eventually tossed aside.
They found a Neo and they threw him in there and they said, okay, go do your thing, and afterwards we'll just reset it all.
Now, I could be wrong on this, and maybe I'm just stating the obvious, but I felt like the Turks were being backed by the Nazis, right? And this was in.
Well, this is World War I, right?
World War I. Well, he died. Oh, World War I, not World War II.
Was it the Russians? And again, I'm asking. I don't know. Because
I'm a little foggy on the colonial powers at that time.
Right.
What I do know is they were looking to get the Turks out of Egypt, right? And they didn't want the Turks to take over the Suez Canal. Obviously, the Suez Canal is a very important piece of real estate to get oil out of the Middle East. Mm-hmm. Or into the Mediterranean, or whatever you want to do.
An entire shipping lane. I mean, that's like the one road. So it's very valuable.
Okay, so was it the Russians that were backing the Turks at that time? Then is that I honestly don't know. I
And
guess it's
neither
not
they were backed by somebody because those were definitely Eastern weapons. Well, not Eastern, I
right.
guess European slash Slavic weapons, I guess. But yeah, because they had biplanes and things like that. So, and again, I'm trying to think. The only thing I remember from World War One is and this is so sad. I'm such an American. They had what was that movie with Jude Law and Rachel Weisz and Ed Harris? It was about like Ed Harris played a Russian sniper. Enemies at the Gate. There you go. Boom, pulled it, nailed it. And and yeah, that's about my knowledge of when the Germans were fighting the Russians, and that was like pre World War One or the beginning of World War One. So that I'm gray on that whole thing as well, and it's especially who was involved with the Turks. I mean, I might have to Google that.
I thought we were in World War II, because I made a note that O'Toole, or not O'Toole, but Lawrence died in 1935. There was I referenced that and I wrote that down because I want Um,
Uh,
anyway, I guess it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, but
I got the right. I got the synopsis right here. Lawrence of Arabia: The story of T.E. Lawrence, the English officer who successfully united and led a diverse, often warring Arab tribe during World War One in order to fight the Turks. So
very good.
yeah,
Okay.
but to your
Yeah.
point, I don't know who
Yeah.
was backing the Turks. I just feel that Germany really didn't come on until World War Two, obviously.
Okay.
But it could have been. I don't know. So
That's okay.
yeah.
That's okay. Just um,
And
what are
it's
we
funny
going to watch
that
next?
what's funny is that's how I tell the wars is by the planes because I just know the Germans had they weren't flying biplanes. That's the only thing I remember is in World War One they had biplanes. Um, I I do also want to talk about when Peter O'Toole was taken hostage, and let's just say he was being lined up along several other applicants for sexy time,
Hmm.
and I thought that was very interesting, and I don't know what that was for, because it wasn't based on his proclivities, which maybe they alluded to. And I'm kind of blind to that in some instances because it didn't really mean anything. They didn't show anything overt in one way or the other. So I could have just thought that he was very British and and leave it at that. I didn't want to assign anything to him because I just didn't know, and I didn't think it was relevant to the story. But when they threw that scene in there where they literally just got a whole bunch of fair looking guys, or as fair as you can get in that part of the world, and it was basically like a beauty pageant for lack of a better term, and they started to strip his clothes off, and they pinched him and said, "You're very fair." And Peter O'Toole, responded by kneeing the guy in the warbles, and then they beat him with reeds and then threw him in the muck, and it was just, I don't know what I was supposed to get out of that. I guess that's my question. Did you guys get anything from that? Like, did it help you understand his character or the situation? Because I didn't. I mean, he had been through so much. I don't think that would have been like a life altering incident, or was that because right after that, that's when he went back to Europe? And I hope they're not saying that because he got assaulted that he's like, I'm going back to my people because you guys just American history X'd me. It was. What are your thoughts on that, Logan?
In that particular, I guess the only thing I took from that was just the complete death of the god that was Lawrence in a way, in that, he was so completely and utterly out of control and just, devastated psychologically and physically and in every way you possibly could, that there was basically no way that he could ever go back to that kind of self as God mentality. and that he was essentially as good as, useless. He was fully brought down to whatever little ordinary man remained, and there was nothing left for him to be able to do there, because he could never, never again be or get back to what he was, because the god had been killed.
His ideal spirit went out in that
His
moment.
spirit was just shattered.
Yeah, because he did come back and, just started blowing people to smithereens. And that's why, what's funny is that's why when you said this is based on a true story, that actually makes sense, because that's not a typical storyline about a guy who actually learns from anything. He's literally just going back again and blowing up trains and
Scorched earth.
yeah, exactly. So it seemed like something a real person would do, just shock and awe type stuff. But what did you think, Eric? What did you get out of that whole scene? Because to me, again, maybe I missed it, and I'm curious to see if you saw something.
To be honest with you, it's not very fresh in my mind. But I would comment on the homosexuality piece. I at the end of the movie, I felt like that I got a sense that he was, but I also got a sense that it didn't matter, that was not a critical part of the story. I felt like they did him justice by the way that Lawrence was portrayed. Perhaps the director or the screenwriter, they weren't looking to
make it a central point,
to make it a funny part of his character. I didn't feel like it was slighted in any way by his sexuality. I thought there were some moments there with Omar Sharif where it was like, yeah, there might be something there, between the two of them.
really?
But I think that was intended. I think that was intended for the viewer to see it that way. And there's another piece of Lawrence's character that I thought was important to talk about, if we're reviewing the film, which was his appreciation of his fellow soldiers when they looked up to him. He did enjoy that. He really did appreciate that.
Oh yeah.
And that was a piece of his character that I wasn't sure if we were going to see or not, whether it be if he was completely oblivious to what they thought of him, because in the beginning it was kind of like he didn't really care what they thought, but at the end he was like happy to be the hero, and they saw him as the hero. All the guys standing around the pool table not doing anything, and he's out there saving the world for the queen, and so I thought that was a really important part of his character, that he actually did appreciate that he was able to move the crown forward for at the end of the day, he's still British, and he did move his people forward. And maybe that's, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe I should just let it rest on that he appreciated his colleagues looking up to him. I think that's where I should leave it.
Well, but I think you touched on something and thanks for mentioning that, because that actually, I see that, and again, I will say that when he first started, and to the point about him wanting to just get out of there, because I remember he was in like a patent clerk office, and he said literally to his coworker, we're little small men in a little small room. And then he got the opportunity to go, look for Faisal, and that's why he was so he was not like he wanted to leave just because he was bored and disenfranchised. But to that point about the adulation, I think, and again, I'm not trying to psychoanalyze him, but I just see malignant narcissism running through this guy's head.
Yes.
And whatever the intent, I think that not only did he feed off of that from, when he first started coming in contact with these tribes, and they followed him, and it was kind of like something like Game Out of Thrones. He was, bringing these people together under him and going on a journey, a quest. And then when he came back, he started to get the adulation, and he was even trying to placate to them when he came back, and he was like skinny, and he was wearing somebody else's suit, but he was like, sauntering up like, hey guys, oh, bloody good, you got a new cricket table, that's fantastic. And while he was walking away, they even mocked him, said, yeah, he's laying it on a little thick, isn't he? So it was almost like he was seeking that that affirmation from somebody, anybody. So whether he was being praised by the tribes or his contemporaries in the service, I think he needed that, and that's who he was. Is he was basically somebody who always wanted that, that always wanted the cheers, and I didn't realize that until you just said it, Eric. Yeah, I think that was his fuel, was basically people looking up to him and admiring him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and let me throw something completely sideways on this, because since I just saw this, I am only now getting the references from not Prometheus, but what was the last Alien film where it had Michael Fassbender fighting Michael Fassbender? No, it was on Prometheus, because
was,
yeah. Did you see that, Eric? Prometheus?
Yes.
When he was because he was watching Lawrence of Arabia while everybody was in hibernation, and he dyed his hair, combed it to the side, and he would start quoting these lines from Lawrence of Arabia that meant nothing to me, but obviously he was going down that path of I am God. And now I might have to watch that whole movie again, because it makes a lot more sense. If he's basically trying to embody Peter O'Toole, then it might fill in a lot of the gaps in that performance that I just didn't resonate to me. So yeah, because I don't know if you remember that, he literally was watching Lawrence of Arabia while people are in cryo sleep, and he dyed his hair, and he was like combing it to the side in that same fashion that Peter O'Toole had. And he was, I think he was, and he was also quoting Shelley and stuff like that. Very, very, and Peter O'Toole was quoting, philosophers and authors. So, yeah, just an interesting side note.
Yeah.
I just, I guess I kind of went into Lawrence Arabia looking for inspirations of or Lucas, basically George Lucas is, what George Lucas pulled out of Lawrence Arabia. That I went into the movie looking for that, and obviously I found it. I mean, I knew that kind of a movie would be something that he would pull from,
Like the whole Lost Eisley spaceport.
Yeah, I mean, I don't.
He shot it. Actually, he shot it in Morocco, just like this was shot in Morocco.
Yeah, and I don't know if I was making connections that weren't actually there or not, But anytime I looked at the guys riding the camels, I'm thinking about tauntauns, and of course Alec Guinness, I mean, how could you not pull like Obi-Wan Kenobi out of that character, Prince Faisal? I mean, there's a lot of similarity there with the kind of very wise words of Faisal, this very he's thinking, he's looking at the forest and not the trees, and just like Obi-Wan would, and then you've got Omar Sharif writing in there completely in black, and just awesome.
That was one of those baller moves.
The guy's like he's drinking from our well, and like, I mean, so maybe I'm making connections that aren't really there, but I was looking for them, and for better or worse. So.
Well, and to that point, when and again, I wasn't even aware that you were looking at that, but I saw that connection. Remember when I mentioned about Peter O'Toole going back for the for the Lost Man, and it was the whole Tauntaun speech was almost like verbatim, like if you go back there you'll die. He goes, no, then I'll die. It was just it jumped out at me, and a lot of the scenery just reminded me of where and Logan, where was Luke from again? What's the name of that planet? Not Tatooine.
Tatooine.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Well,
yeah,
Tatooine, right?
Yeah, Tatooine.
I remember when the cinematography of the geography of this area was so beautiful. I looked it up online, like where was this actually shot? And yeah, it was shot in Morocco and then some parts of Spain. And I was like, Morocco, yeah, that's where they shot Star Wars. So
Yep.
you're not off the mark there. There was, but I what's funny is I was listening to Alec Guinness talk with a little bit of a accent. Again, I'm giving him a pass on this one, but
Right.
he was so not aloof, but just so sure and steady in his perspective of what was going on, and just dropping pearls of wisdom in everything he said. It definitely, he could have literally said, this isn't the waterway you want. I would have totally bought it if he was throwing Jedi mind tricks out there. There are no coincidences in those similarities. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Anyway, anything else that you guys saw on this that you really dug, and again, I saw so much of it, and it's still fresh in my mind, so I could talk about anything. But what are the things that you appreciated most? I guess
the other thing that I wanted to hear what you guys thought about was that this was a movie from a time when the studios, I feel like, they decide, hey, this is going to be the epic movie for X year. Let's get all of our A team together and let's get this thing going. And like that's a time that's not now. We're in 2020 and people make movies. They do the best darn job that they can, but it's not decided that,
this is going to be the hit. Yeah.
Or more or less, obviously there's Avengers and Infinity War, Marvel knows and Disney, they know that this is going to be a big hit, no doubt about it, right?
But to that point, that was kind of
decide, but to make an epic, right? We have decided that, and I don't know. Do you think what I'm asking you is, do you feel like the theaters signed on and wrote the checks that this is going to be a big hit, or that this is going to be an epic? Do you guys feel that way?
I think I'd love to give it this analogy. And first of all, the whole Disney MCU, that was a happy accident, because trust me, Iron Man was not going to be a blockbuster. That was just, Robert Downey Jr. and oh geez, what's the director's name?
I guess I'll just say one more thing. I really like this time period in American cinema when people put their chips on the table and they're like, this is what we're betting on, and like, it's not the time where in 2020 where you can just kind of pull money out of thin air, anyway.
No, you're, and that's what I was saying is, I was like the Disney thing. Once they got to the end of it, sure, they knew their returns would be X dollars. But I think also back then the studios, there were like, what, 3 or 4 big studios. So they had, first of all, the playing field pretty much to themselves. It wasn't like an indie film was going to come and wipe them out. So it was, obviously a formula of, okay, we put these 5 big names in it on the poster. That's going to sell you tickets. And yeah, I think the theater said, ooh, the new Alec Guinness, Anthony Quinn, Peter O'Toole film is coming out. And, it's just a matter of, how long are we going to run it? And, what's going to be the returns? Especially, come on, 3.5 hours? You'd be insane to gamble on that if you didn't know. I mean, because you had like what, your Ben-Hurs, your Cleopatras, and this. Those were not based on, let's take a stab at it. I think those were kind of, hey Paramount, we're going to be coming out this month. Just let us have this, and we'll. Because you're right, these movies were so huge in scale. If they would have flopped, that you're talking about, because I mean that location in and of itself. I mean, I don't even know how you pull that off nowadays. The amount of horses they had, the extras, the scenes, that just and the runtime. I don't know how much that would cost, in this day and age. If they, I mean, I'm sure they do it all CG now, but I mean, even didn't they try to recreate Ben-Hur?
They did.
Why? And that totally flopped. So, yeah, if you can't improve upon something, and with today's technology and all that, I think it's also because the audience and just the diversity of the different media outlets and theater and production companies. It's just you have so many. I don't think people would all flock to that one movie in the theater.
So Logan, let me ask you the question: do you feel like the studio, when they signed the checks for this movie, do you feel like they felt like they had an epic that was about to be made?
I feel like, so we're going back to, the 50s and 60s, I feel like back then the studios had a lot more of a vested interest in making an epic out of, or that wasn't like an original epic. I feel like there was a bigger appetite for it. I feel like there was more invested in that kind of dramatic storytelling and experience of the theater that has been so overshadowed by the newest technology or the next Avengers, or just quite frankly the hairpin shareholder returns that all these movies have to earn in order to even go ahead and do it. And that's why so many remakes are out now, because they think they're a proven property. They're not trying to take a risk. I think there was still the appetite for more of those kind of epic risks. And knowing some of the names involved, I wouldn't be surprised if the studios went to Anthony Quinn and went, so what do you really want to do? You do this big epic, you do this one for us. We'll go ahead and we'll maybe finance another thing you want to do. And I feel like there was a lot more of an appetite for those names, those, that Anthony Quinn, Alec Guinness, Peter O'Toole, where they're kind of a little bit more, boys club. You do this movie for us, we'll make a movie you want to make. I feel like that was more of the time back then. Kind of in between where we're at now and, the original golden age when an actor would be signed to a studio to make all of the studio's pictures. I feel like this was that kind of intermediary time. And that, it just, they wanted to tell this particular story and pull out all the stops, and both the location and the actors did that.
Yeah.
And to that, Logan, do you think, when you're saying they wanted to tell the story, do you think they had this amazing script and the actors signed on, or do you think they had the actors lined up and they kind of found a script in which they could all fit in it? I'm just curious because
I think, like most war movies, somebody had a drive to make a movie about T.E. Lawrence. That would be my guess. I mean, think of, most war movies are telling stories that somebody champions behind the scenes. Somebody has wanted to tell this story for quite some time. And I don't see very many, war movies that are just like, we just want to shoot people, or we want another random movie about World War II, or, we want a movie about whatever. There's some underlying story, underlying character, underlying everyday man who becomes larger than life, or an unwinnable situation that was won. There's somebody who has this fever for that. And I think my assumption, and I have not done this, but if we were to dig into the actual production history of it, I feel like we'd find somebody who was trying to write a T.E. Lawrence story for quite some time, and this was the one that finally came through.
Interesting, because I think you're right. On paper, I wouldn't really necessarily want to know about a British guy that went to Saudi Arabia to help warring tribes. That didn't interest me. It was the names. It was definitely the names. And to your point, Eric,
Mm-hmm.
who would, I mean, try and think right now in the past 10 years of a epic film like this that's been made. And again, I mean, like not part of a extended franchise where it's already has like a built-in audience, like your
Right.
Disney properties, all that stuff. But what's the last epic film that any of us have really seen?
I mean, for me, it was 1917.
Is that epic though? I mean, don't get me wrong, great film, but
Yeah.
I mean, are
No,
they?
you're right. You're right. That I don't know if I should call that epic. You're right. For me, it was epic.
Brilliant film.
um,
Loved it. Yeah.
yeah, no, you're right. It's a kind of a narrow scope. Gosh, man,
Yeah,
that's hard. It's
I
hard for
was
me to
gonna
even
say.
think about.
I was gonna say.
What I would consider an epic, because when I think about an epic, I think about something like an Akira Kurosawa movie with a lot of extras, horses, locations, you know, and I can't even bring one to mind, to be honest
I
with you.
oddly enough, and this is gonna sound very ironic, I'm kind of thinking of like Dances with Wolves. And, I mean, obviously Titanic, but
It's funny. Titanic is where I was going.
yeah,
I was
Okay.
really trying to convince myself, is there something other than Titanic? But I mean, what? Lord of the Rings?
yeah, but
I mean, that's like you're not trying to draw on this existing, an epic. I feel like kind of comes out of nowhere and is so vast you're overwhelmed by it.
that's what I'm thinking and that's what I'm saying is like because The Hobbit. I mean, they have a built-in audience with the book, and and
Oh,
and
I would have actually just said Fellowship of the Ring, like the first one, the
true,
one that really kind of, sure, it's a Lord of the Rings, you know the books, whatever, but that first kind of Peter Jackson style epic, just the first one,
Right.
not the ones that have the built-in audiences.
right. No, I'm with you. I mean, it was a glorious
Yeah.
film, and again, that's before he got caught up in the George Lucas curse of doing
Hmm.
CG all over the place.
Right.
Because I loved the first
Well,
one.
that's why I didn't count Avatar. If
It
it were on location, and if it were domestic, meaning to the Earth, as opposed to this, CG blue space monkey adventure, that's one thing. But then maybe. But no, I would
Right.
have to say probably Titanic would have been where my mind first went.
Yeah, no, that's and of course I would say the Scorsese casinos and Goodfellas. But I'm dialing down the epic aspect. I mean, classic, obviously, cornerstone in cinema history. But epic, I don't know if it's epic in that sense
Mhm.
where defining an epic, I would say it's something that the scale is just so immense and it's like a force of nature, and it's just an indelible mark on film, like Lawrence of
Right.
Arabia. And the only reason I
Right.
said, and obviously Titanic, but to me,
Mhm.
Titanic was so, with the love aspect and the Billy Zane and that it wasn't. I would say Gandhi was epic. With Ben Kingsley, that was an epic one in my mind. And like I was saying, Dances with Wolves.
Hmm.
Just
Well, maybe it's okay for us to have different definitions of
no,
what an
absolutely.
epic is.
Please
I mean,
use your definition. I'm just curious.
I mean, when I think of an epic, I do kind of think of it. It kind of has to be a dramatic. There can be funny moments, but overwhelmingly, it's a dramatic piece. And then you've got to have the locations, as you said,
Hmm.
Logan, excuse me. But yeah, I mean, maybe we have kind of a loose definition of it, but I think it's a bit of it's kind of becoming a bygone era a little bit, this kind of thing.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So
No, no, and that is, it's a lost art. It is absolutely a lost art and a lost time. Just to make a little finer point on certain types of films. Off the top, what is your favorite war film? And open to interpretation, but what's your, and by favorite, I'm not saying, but what's the most, like the one you would rate the highest on your personal viewing list, war film in any type, but just obviously some sort of a military conflict.
I would have to probably say for me, it's between Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan. I'm going to go with Saving Private Ryan because I did some work with American Legion where I used to live and used to work, and a number of World War II vets, and everyone that I had ever talked to just stated how either they couldn't watch it or they could just never quite, were never okay after seeing it, and that opening sequence of Saving Private Ryan was just so real that it took them back there. And to be able to cinematically capture that level of realism, at least to their recollections, I think elevated kind of that movie for me, because it always kind of harkens back to my conversations with them, and sitting up and talking at the bar or wherever we were, and just those kinds of personal stories that immediately relates to. But I think is just kind of as a war drama. Yeah, Schindler's List, I think, just, I don't know. There's something about that one that just strikes me personally, and that is just usually what comes to mind first.
Those are both amazing choices. I mean, yeah, Schindler's is haunting, and so good, and the black and white cinematography, and of course Saving Private Ryan with some of the most realistic at the time, and probably still to this day, depictions of war violence, and just the way it was shot at that high frame rate, and it was just, and I think it's the first time you really saw a main character suffering from post-traumatic stress in a way that didn't prevent them from doing their job, but it was like something they had to just carry with them. In Tom Hanks, when he had the shakes, and he just kept doing his job. They kind of ripped that off in Fury. I don't know if you saw that. Fury's with Brad Pitt and.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was good, but they kind of went off the rails on that one. And I'm sorry, Eric, what is your war film?
Man, Schindler's List. That was one hell of a movie. Man, I mean, I remember when I walked out of the theater from seeing that, it was had such an impact on me. Really made me kind of, grasp what really happened, over there. And some of the positive, things that happened as well. I mean, very few, obviously, but that human beings, that there are some good human beings, and brave human beings. But I would say, for me, and I'm probably forgetting some movies, but 1917 was very, very incredible for me. I actually brought my dad to go see it. I thought it was going to be such an important movie. And it had so many technical aspects that really I enjoyed. With kind of following these two unknown soldiers, through their through the bunkers and all, just through the whole movie, basically. That whole notion of kind of a new kind of cinematography, if you will. The subject matter was incredible. It really put me in their shoes. They kept it very personal, it was very personal. And I don't feel like it was glorifying violence in any way. I realized some people felt it was kind of the POV video game. Like, let's get people who might like that to watch this. I didn't get that, and I just thought it was just such a well-crafted movie that meant so much. There were incredible scenes of the plane coming right at you, landing on the barn, and oh my gosh, it was just, for me, that was just it's very top of mind as far as one of the great movies that I've seen recently. So I'm going to go with that one.
No, and to both of your points, I mean, Logan, Saving Private Ryan was a tour de force, and I would put that kind of in that whole quote unquote epic genre. And in 1917, when I saw that, again, I really appreciate, because for such a long time it was after Oliver Stone did Platoon, that was kind of the niche thing where everybody was doing the Vietnam films, and when obviously Spielberg, he had stories he wanted to tell about World War II, and Saving Private Ryan did that, and it really showed that just the carnage, because I think people only saw World War II through like reels and old black and white footage, so they didn't really get the flavor of it, for lack of a better term. And 1917, again, groundbreaking cinematography, and the story did have a lot more heart. I know a lot of people compared it to Dunkirk because they came out kind of back to back, but Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk, and this is something I've always thought, I could be wrong, but I've thought with Christopher Nolan's work is technically he's, up there with the best of them, but his characters always seem to lack that heart, that emotional attachment. It's more about, wow, look how beautiful everything looks, or how, well structured everything is, but it's not, you're not feeling the anguish of the characters. 1917, since the camera never leaves the actual, primary actors, you feel it, and you get that. And again, I know there was the same style of cinematography in like City of Men, Birdman, those long takes, but just to be able to pull something like that off for an hour and a half or however long it was, I thought was game breaking. But they also did it within the context of a good story, so it wasn't just a gimmick. It was cool to help communicate a valuable story. Now, for me, just because I don't want to duplicate you guys, but those are both phenomenal films, I'm going to have to say that one of my favorite ones was Full Metal Jacket. And not that it was a particularly, good technical war film, but it just had so many different aspects to it. Going from training camp and then to, Vietnam. And again, I was going to say my first war film that I saw that was impactful to me was Platoon. And that had a lot of characters in it. I mean, if you look back now, it's like, you got Charlie Sheen, Johnny Depp, Corey Glover from the lead singer of Living Color, Keith David, what's his name from Scrubs, the redhead mature doctor from Scrubs, I forget his name, but he was in it. Tom Berenger with an amazing role, and Willem Dafoe. So you had all these amazing actors, and you had that. I would say there was so much emotional investment I had in that one, but technically and just story wise, the Stanley Kubrick Full Metal Jacket just hit me kind of in the gut, because it was such a horror show, and it was not all in a jungle, which is kind of Platoon. Everything is just like 20 feet away and you don't know what's coming at you. But Full Metal Jacket was just, the breaking of the in the training camp of Vincent D'Onofrio, and how he goes insane, and Matthew Modine, and seeing the world through his eyes, kind of being like a wisecracker, naive guy, and then at the end he's taking out snipers, and it's just a very interesting arc, and shot in a way only Kubrick could have done. So that's the one that comes to mind. I probably, with more thought, I might go back to a Platoon, or and definitely you guys have taken the good one. So I'm doing my
bat and cleanup.
yeah, exactly. But guys, I'll tell you what, this has been awesome. So Lawrence of Arabia, amazing cinematography, sweeping storyline, the study in man's obsession with conquering fate and sometimes falling short. Great acting, great cast, the lost art of filmmaking, the production companies, a little bit of Joker sprinkled in there, and some of our favorite films. Do you guys have anything before we check out? Because I know I've kept you for like an hour and a half.
No, it's great. As always, appreciate you pulling us all together.
Absolutely. And Eric, you got to come back with us for some other stuff. I want to talk about some Kurosawa, and maybe we can do like the Seven Samurai or whatever film. I mean, I would love to crank out some more of these with some really specific movies, because usually we kind of talk about a little bit of everything, but these great classic films, especially now since nothing's coming out in the theaters, going back and doing these reviews, I think is key, and giving people some ideas of things they should check out. Because again, if I was out in theaters, the last thing I would even be thinking about is Lawrence of Arabia. But there's nowhere to go, so you might as well check out a 3-hour movie.
I would just say that for anybody that's listening, I think it's okay to watch Lawrence Arabia in 2 sessions.
Probably the best way. I mean, they do have an intermission. They do literally have an intermission. So
yeah, don't feel bad if you want to watch it over 2 days. That no harm done. Great movie. It was so much more than I was expecting, and I really appreciate the growth of the character. You could watch him kind of in his journey through the movie. I really appreciated that. And then to speak to the Kurosawa, if you guys are interested in that, the stuff that's just post-war Kurosawa, basically right in the beginning, before he gets into color. For me, there's some really nice little movies there. And it just deals with the struggle of the people in Japan post-war, all of the terrible things that happened. But there's some very endearing stories. So yeah, I'd be looking forward to talking about those or anything else you guys would like to talk about. This has been a lot of fun.
No, likewise, and I think we need to hand off. So, who recommended Lawrence of Arabia first?
Me.
Okay, Eric. So yeah, so maybe we'll go to one of Logan's, and then we can come back to another one of yours just to sprinkle it up. I mean, I'll watch anything. So, and I got opinions on everything. So it's always fun. It's a blast. But guys, I do appreciate it. And we're going to come out with more of these videos and audio tracks for the podcast. Don't forget, there's a lot of entertainment out there on platforms like this, but we appreciate you checking out ours, and we enjoy bringing you this content, and we hope to see you soon with some more interesting discussions on interesting topics. And remember, if it's worthwhile, it's worth binging.